A bully pours juice on a black student in front of the whole school, laughing, thinking it's just another joke. But what he doesn't know is that the quiet kid he humiliated is a friend of the Hells Angels leader. The next day, the ground shakes with the roar of motorcycles outside the school. Tough men in leather walk straight through the gates, and every student freezes. They're not here for revenge. They're here for him. As guilt turns to fear, the bully's life begins to crumble. His friends turn on him. His reputation burns. And when the truth about the boy's family comes out, it rocks the entire town to its core. But what happens when the one who started the hate becomes the only one brave enough to fix it? Can a single act of cruelty turn into a story of forgiveness that changes everyone? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Jefferson High's cafeteria, casting long rectangles of light across the linoleum floor. The familiar buzz of teenage chatter filled the air. Gossip about weekend plans, complaints about pop quizzes, and bursts of laughter from various cliques scattered around the room. Jason Miller slouched in his chair at the popular table, picking at his fries while half listening to his teammates discuss their upcoming football game. His Letterman jacket hung loose on his broad shoulders, the school colors of red and gold marking him as one of the stars of Jefferson High's undefeated team. His attention drifted across the cafeteria, where Malik Carter sat alone at a corner table. The new kid had his nose buried in a book, completely ignoring the social whirlwind around him. Something about Malik's quiet confidence made Jason's skin prickle with irritation. "Look at the new guy," Jason muttered, nudging his friend Tyler. "Acting like he's too good to sit with anyone." Tyler snickered. "Yeah, what's his deal? Been here 2 weeks and barely says a word to anyone." The irritation grew stronger as Jason watched Malik turn a page, completely absorbed in his reading. The cafeteria seemed too loud suddenly, too cramped. Jason's half-empty orange juice carton sat untouched on his tray, and a familiar restlessness stirred in his chest, the same feeling he got before making a big play on the field. "Bet I could get him to look up from that book," Jason said, his voice carrying a challenge that made his teammates lean in with interest. "Do it," Tyler urged, eyes gleaming. "Show him how we welcome new kids at Jefferson." Jason stood up, orange juice in hand, aware of the eyes following him as he crossed the cafeteria. The conversations around him dimmed slightly, like someone turning down the volume on a radio. His heart thumped harder with each step, but he kept his trademark smirk firmly in place. Malik didn't look up, even when Jason's shadow fell, across his book. The page showed some kind of diagram, probably homework for advanced physics, or something equally nerdy. Jason's grip tightened on the juice carton. "Hey, new kid," Jason said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You think you're better than everyone else?" Malik finally looked up, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm just reading," he said quietly. "That's all." The levelness of his voice only fueled Jason's anger. Without thinking it through, he raised the carton and turned it upside down over Malik's head. Orange juice splashed down, soaking Malik's dark curls and dripping onto his white shirt. The cafeteria went dead silent. Malik sat perfectly still for a moment, juice running down his face. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached for a napkin and slowly wiped his eyes. He gathered his now soaked book, stood up, and walked toward the exit without saying a word or looking at anyone. The silence broke with scattered laughter and whoops from Jason's table. But as he turned to acknowledge their approval, he caught other expressions among his classmates. Frowns, averted eyes, uncomfortable shifting in seats. Before he could process these reactions, Principal Weber's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Miller, my office? Now." The rest of the school day passed in a blur of detention slips and stern lectures. By the time Jason got home, the sun was setting, painting the modest houses of Cedar Street in shades of orange and pink. His father's pickup truck sat in the cracked driveway, and the familiar scent of his mother's meatloaf drifted from the kitchen. Inside, the small living room was dominated by his father's recliner, where Frank Miller sat watching the evening news. The walls were decorated with Jason's football trophies and a few faded family photos. His mother, Sarah, called from the kitchen. "Is that you, Jason?" The principal called. Jason dropped his backpack by the door, his stomach churning. "Yeah, Mom?" It wasn't a big deal. "Not a big deal?" Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her nurse's scrubs. Her face showed the fatigue of a 12-hour shift, but her eyes were sharp with concern. "You poured juice on another student." Frank Miller muted the TV and turned in his recliner. "Boys will be boys, Sarah. Probably just some harmless teasing." "It wasn't harmless, Frank," Sarah protested. "This isn't like our Jason." "The kid needs to toughen up," Frank said, his voice gruff. "World's not going to coddle him." Jason stood between his parents, feeling the familiar tension build. His father had always taught him that respect was earned through strength, while his mother's gentler nature pulled him in another direction. Before either parent could say more, a knock at the front door made them all turn. Through the window's sheer curtain, Jason could make out a tall figure on their porch. When Sarah opened the door, Reverend Elijah Carter stood there, his dark suit neat despite the late hour. In one hand, he held a well-worn Bible, in the other what looked like a damp book. But it was his expression that caught Jason off guard. Not the anger he expected, but something closer to understanding. "Good evening, Mrs. Miller," Reverend Carter said, his deep voice gentle. "I was hoping I might have a word with Jason and his parents." The living room suddenly felt too small as Sarah invited him in. Jason watched the Reverend's face, searching for signs of the fury he deserved, but found only a patient calm that somehow made him feel worse. The juice incident that had seemed so funny hours ago now sat like a stone in his stomach. Reverend Carter declined Sarah's offer of coffee, remaining standing as he addressed them all. "I'm here about what happened today with my nephew, Malik." "Reverend," Frank started, his voice holding a defensive edge. "Boys this age are at a crucial point in their lives," Reverend Carter finished smoothly. "A point where they're learning who they truly want to be." He turned to Jason, his gaze direct but not unkind. "The question is, Jason, is this who you want to be?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any lecture Jason had received that day. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet the Reverend's eyes or his mother's worried gaze. The evening news played silently on the TV, its flickering light casting shifting shadows on the walls covered with his achievements. Achievements that suddenly felt hollow. "My brother, Malik's father, was a firefighter," Reverend Carter continued, his voice soft but clear. "He died saving a family from a burning building 2 years ago. Since then, Malik has carried not just his grief, but his father's legacy of serving others. The book you ruined today? It was his father's favorite, one of the few things he has left of him." Jason's throat tightened as the full weight of what he'd done began to settle on his shoulders. He thought about his own father, about how it would feel to have only a book to remember him by, and then to have even that taken away by someone's thoughtless cruelty. "I'm not here to demand punishment," Reverend Carter said, looking at each of them in turn. "I'm here because I believe in the power of understanding, and because sometimes the path to becoming who we're meant to be starts with facing who we've been." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of crickets through the open window. Jason stood there, feeling the weight of his actions, the disappointment in his mother's eyes, and something else he couldn't quite name yet, something that felt like the first stirring of change. The scene hung suspended in that moment, with Jason Miller's world shifting ever so slightly on its axis, while Reverend Carter waited patiently for a response that would reveal whether this moment would be just another incident or the beginning of something more. The Millers' living room felt smaller than usual as Reverend Carter settled into their faded floral armchair. The TV's glow painted shifting shadows across the wood-paneled walls where Jason's football trophies caught the light. Sarah Miller perched anxiously on the edge of the couch, while Frank sat back, arms crossed, his expression guarded. "Please, let me tell you about Malik," Reverend Carter began, his deep voice filling the quiet room. He placed his Bible carefully on the coffee table, next to a stack of Sports Illustrated magazines. 2 years ago, Malik's father, my brother Marcus, was working late at his auto shop. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat engineer, came home with medals and nightmares, but found peace working with engines. Jason shifted uncomfortably on the couch, the leather squeaking beneath him. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand, a gesture that would usually embarrass him, but tonight felt like an anchor. "It was a rainy night," Reverend Carter continued, his eyes distant with memory. "Marcus was driving home when he came upon a terrible accident on Highway 37. A motorcycle had skidded in the rain, throwing its rider into the guardrail." He paused, looking directly at Jason. That rider was a man known as Big Ronnie Henderson. Frank Miller sat up straighter. Everyone in town knew Big Ronnie, the imposing president of the local Hells Angels chapter, whose leather-clad presence commanded respect and a hint of fear. Marcus pulled over without hesitation. The motorcycle was leaking gas, sparks threatening to ignite it. "But my brother," Reverend Carter's voice caught slightly. "He crawled under that wreck in the rain and oil to drag Ronnie clear. Seconds later, the bike went up in flames." Sarah gasped softly, her hand tightening around Jason's. The teenager felt a chill despite the warm evening air drifting through the window. "Big Ronnie survived, thanks to Marcus. Made a full recovery. He came to thank Marcus personally, brought his whole chapter to the shop. Said he'd never forget the debt." The Reverend's smile held a touch of sadness. 6 months later, Marcus was gone. A faulty lift at his shop. Malik was 15 years old. Jason's throat felt tight. He thought about Malik in the cafeteria, how composed he'd remained even with juice dripping down his face. That quiet dignity took on a different meaning now. Since then, Malik has carried himself with the same strength his father showed. He tutors younger kids at the youth center, maintains straight A's, helps his mother with his younger sister. Reverend Carter leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The book you ruined today?" It was his father's copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Marcus used to read it during his deployments. The margins are filled with his notes, little messages to his children about perseverance, about facing life's struggles with grace. Shame burned hot in Jason's chest. He remembered how his friends had laughed, how he'd played to the crowd. Now those memories tasted bitter. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty, Jason," the Reverend said softly. "Guilt without purpose helps no one. But I want you to understand something. Kindness travels farther than cruelty, son. It echoes through lives in ways we can't imagine. Just ask Big Ronnie. A single act of kindness changed his whole outlook on life." Frank Miller cleared his throat. "Reverend, I appreciate you coming by, but—" "No, Frank," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "Let him finish." Reverend Carter stood slowly, picking up his Bible. "Malik doesn't know I'm here. He wouldn't want me fighting his battles. But I believe in moments like these, moments when we can choose what kind of person we want to become." He moved toward the door, then turned back. The youth center is always looking for volunteers, if you're interested in making things right." After the Reverend left, silence settled over the living room like dust. Frank switched the TV back on, but the sound seemed hollow against the weight of what they'd heard. Sarah touched Jason's shoulder as she headed to the kitchen. "Mom?" Jason called after her. She paused in the doorway, the kitchen light haloing her figure. "Forgiveness is a gift rarely offered twice, Jason. Remember that." Then she disappeared into the other room, leaving Jason alone with his thoughts and the droning TV. That night, Jason lay in bed, staring at his ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck up years ago still faintly shone. He tried to dismiss the Reverend's words, to push away the image of Malik's calm face. But the harder he tried, the more persistent they became. The Reverend's steady gaze haunted him, filled with a compassion he hadn't expected, and somehow didn't want to disappoint. He thought about his own father's military photos on the mantel, how proud he felt telling people about Frank's service. What would it be like to have only a book full of notes to remember him by? The thought made his stomach clench. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through his bedroom blinds. Jason dressed mechanically, his usual confidence replaced by a nagging discomfort. He skipped breakfast, ignoring his mother's concerned look, and headed out earlier than usual. The morning air was cool against his face as he walked toward school, his footsteps echoing off the quiet houses. He was halfway there when he heard it, a low rumble in the distance, growing louder. The sound of multiple motorcycles approaching made him stop in his tracks. The rumble grew to a roar, echoing down the empty street, and Jason stood frozen on the sidewalk, wondering if what the Reverend had said about Big Ronnie was about to become very, very relevant to his immediate future. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook High's brick facade as the first rumble of motorcycles echoed through the quiet streets. Students pressed against classroom windows, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. The sound grew louder, a deep thundering that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. Jason stood frozen in the main hallway, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the glass doors, he watched as a line of gleaming motorcycles rolled into the parking lot like a leather-clad parade. Chrome pipes flashed in the sunlight, and the riders moved with practiced precision, parking their bikes in a neat formation. At their head was a figure that seemed to command attention without effort. "Big Ronnie!" Henderson cut an imposing figure as he dismounted his motorcycle. 6 feet 4 inches of weathered leather and earned authority. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and despite his intimidating size, there was something gentle in the way he carried himself. His eyes, sharp and alert beneath his bandana, scanned the school entrance with quiet purpose. Malik emerged from the crowd that had gathered, walking with the same quiet dignity he'd shown the day before. Big Ronnie's face softened at the sight of him. The big man stepped forward and placed a protective hand on Malik's shoulder, the gesture both gentle and firm, a promise of protection written in that simple touch. "How you holding up, son?" Ronnie's voice carried across the parking lot, deep but kind. "I'm okay, Mr. Henderson," Malik replied, a small smile playing at his lips. "Dad always said you had perfect timing." The whisper started immediately, spreading through the gathered students like wildfire. Jason watched as his so-called friends, the same ones who'd laughed and cheered yesterday, melted away into the crowd. Tommy Richards, who'd filmed the whole juice incident on his phone, suddenly became very interested in his shoelaces. Mike Peterson, who'd been the loudest cheerleader, slipped through a side door without a backward glance. "Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew," Ronnie's voice carried weight and warmth. "When I heard what happened yesterday..." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Jason. There was no anger in that gaze, just disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. The first bell rang, but nobody moved. Principal Walsh emerged from the building, looking concerned until recognition crossed his face. "Mr. Henderson," he called out, extending his hand. "It's been a while." "Just making sure young Malik here knows he's got friends," Ronnie replied, shaking the principal's hand. "Marcus Carter's son deserves respect." The morning classes passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Jason felt each stare like a physical touch, each whispered word like a small cut. By lunchtime, the cafeteria had become an entirely different world from yesterday. Jason stood in the lunch line, tray in hand, suddenly aware of how empty the space around him had become. The same people who'd crowded around him yesterday now gave him a wide berth. He watched as Malik sat at his usual table, quietly eating his lunch and reading a different book. This one carefully wrapped in a protective cover. For the first time since freshman year, Jason sat alone. His usual table was occupied by his former friends, who studied their food with intense concentration when he walked past. He found an empty corner table, the plastic surface scratched with years of graffiti, and tried to eat his sandwich. It tasted like cardboard. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. When the final bell rang, Jason walked home slowly, kicking at loose stones on the sidewalk. The house was quiet when he arrived. His mother would still be at the hospital for another hour, but his father's truck sat in the driveway, unusual for this time of day. Frank Miller sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He looked up as Jason entered, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, son," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Jason dropped his backpack and slid into the chair across from his father. Frank stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't tell you everything last night," he began. "About Marcus Carter. I knew him. Not well, but enough." He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, there was an accident at the factory, a machine malfunction that could have cost 20 people their jobs, including mine. Marcus was called in to look at it. He had a way with machines that seemed almost magical. Frank's hands wrapped around his coffee cup. He worked through the night, fixed what 3 other mechanics said couldn't be fixed, saved all our jobs. And when the supervisor tried to give him credit, tried to get him a bonus, Frank's voice grew thick. Marcus just shook his head, said he was just doing what needed doing, never took credit, never asked for recognition. The silence in the kitchen grew heavy. "You poured juice on a hero's son," Frank said finally, the shame evident in his voice. "I raised you better than that, Jason, or at least I should have." Jason felt the weight of his father's words settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. That night, he lay in bed, staring at his ceiling, his conscience too heavy for sleep. The events of the day played on repeat in his mind. Big Ronnie's disappointed gaze, his friend's cowardly retreat, his father's shame, and above all, Malik's quiet dignity. The darkness pressed in around him as the hours ticked by, each moment a reminder of how quickly a person's world could shift, how actions could ripple out in ways you never expected. The glow-in-the-dark stars above offered no comfort tonight, their faint light seeming to accuse rather than comfort. Morning sunlight streamed through the school's windows, casting long shadows across the freshly waxed hallway floors. Jason arrived early, his stomach in knots, rehearsing the words he'd practiced all night. He stood by Malik's locker, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, watching students filter in through the main entrance. When Malik appeared, walking, with purposeful steps, and carrying his usual stack of books, Jason straightened up. His mouth felt dry as paper. "Hey, Malik," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" Malik's face remained perfectly neutral as he approached his locker. Without acknowledging Jason's presence, he turned the combination lock with practiced precision, opened the metal door, and began exchanging books from his backpack. "Listen, about what happened," Jason started again, his prepared speech crumbling in his mind. "I was wrong, and I'm really—" Malik closed his locker with a quiet click and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the increasingly crowded hallway. Several students watched the exchange, some whispering behind their hands. "Wow, that was pathetic." The sharp voice cut through the hallway chatter. Jason turned to find Naomi Carter, Malik's younger sister, leaning against a nearby locker. Despite being only 15 years old, her presence commanded attention. She wore a bright yellow sweater that seemed to amplify her fierce expression. "I wasn't—" Jason began defensively. "Save it," Naomi interrupted, pushing off from the locker. "You think a half-baked morning apology makes up for humiliating my brother in front of the whole school?" She stepped closer, her dark eyes blazing. "If you really mean it, prove it." "How am I supposed to do that when he won't even talk to me?" Jason protested. Naomi's laugh was short and bitter. "Figure it out. Actions speak louder than words, and right now all you're giving is cheap talk." She adjusted her backpack strap and turned to leave, then paused. "You know where to find us if you're serious about making things right." The rest of the school day passed in a fog. Jason barely heard his teacher's lectures, his mind replaying Naomi's words over and over. When the final bell rang, he stood in the locker room, staring at his football gear. Coach would be furious if he missed practice, but something in his gut told him this was more important. Making his decision, Jason grabbed his backpack and slipped out before his teammates arrived. The community youth center was only 6 blocks away, but each step felt heavier than the last. The modest brick building sat on the corner of Oak and Pine, its faded sign reading Hope Community Center in weathered blue letters. Basketball sounds drifted from the side of the building, the steady thump of balls on pavement, the squeak of sneakers, children's laughter. The front door was propped open with a rubber doorstop, letting out the smell of cooking food and the hum of conversation. Jason hesitated on the threshold, his heart pounding. Through the door, he could see volunteers moving about, carrying trays and wiping tables. A few heads turned his way, expressions turning guarded. "Well, this is unexpected." Reverend Carter's deep voice made Jason jump. The older man stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his expression curious but not unwelcoming. Jason swallowed hard. "I wanted to help, if that's okay." The Reverend studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We can always use more hands." He disappeared briefly into a storage closet and returned with a broom. "Start with the main room. Mind the corners." Jason accepted the broom, acutely aware of the stares from other volunteers. He recognized a few faces from school, their expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion. Keeping his head down, he began sweeping, working his way methodically across the worn linoleum floor. As the afternoon wore on, the center filled with more people. Elementary school kids arrived for the after-school program, their backpacks almost as big as they were. Teenagers drifted in and out, some heading to the basketball court, others gathering around tables to do homework. Around 5 o'clock, Jason noticed Malik sitting at a corner table with a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. They were bent over a math workbook, Malik explaining something with patient gestures. The child's face lit up with understanding, and he gave Malik a high five that echoed through the room. "That's Tommy," Reverend Carter said quietly, appearing beside Jason. "He was failing math 3 months ago. Now he's bringing home B's." The Reverend's eyes crinkled with pride. "Malik has that effect on people. quiet strength that lifts others up. Jason watched as another child approached Malik's table, clutching a textbook. Without hesitation, Malik made room, pulling up another chair. The respect in the children's eyes was unmistakable. As dusk began to fall, Jason's arms ached from sweeping and mopping, but the center's floors gleamed. He'd also helped serve dinner to the younger kids, washed dishes, and organized the storage closet. Each task had been simple, mundane even, but somehow they felt more meaningful than anything he'd done in a long time. When he finally left, the street lamps were flickering to life. He was barely a block away when he heard familiar voices. "Hey, Miller, switching careers from football to janitor?" 3 of his teammates lounged against a parked car, still in their practice uniforms. Tyler, his usual wingman in the cafeteria, smirked. "Working with the preacher now? Man, what happened to you?" Jason felt his face flush, old instincts rising to make a joke, laugh it off, join in their mockery. Instead, he thought of Malik tutoring those kids, of Reverend Carter's quiet dignity, of the simple satisfaction of doing something useful. "Just helping out," he said simply, and kept walking. Their laughter followed him down the street, but it didn't sting like he expected. For the first time in days, his shoulders felt lighter, as if he'd set down a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. The evening air was cool on his face as he walked home, the sound of his footsteps steady on the sidewalk. Over the next 7 days, Jason fell into a new routine. Instead of heading to football practice after the final bell, he walked the 6 blocks to Hope Community Center, his backpack heavy with homework he'd complete later that night. On Monday, Reverend Carter met him with paint cans and brushes. "These walls haven't seen a fresh coat in 8 years, he said, gesturing to the dingy beige walls marked with scuffs and fingerprints. "Think you can handle eggshell white?" Jason rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The paint had a sharp, clean smell that filled the room as he carefully cut in around windows and door frames. His arms ached from reaching overhead, but there was something satisfying about watching the fresh paint cover old marks, like erasing past mistakes. Tuesday brought kitchen duty. Jason ladled out bowls of thick vegetable soup, while elderly volunteers bustled around him, checking temperatures and refilling bread baskets. He recognized faces from school among those who came to eat, kids whose circumstances he'd never bothered to notice before. On Wednesday, Reverend Carter led him to a storage room filled with broken furniture. "Got any experience with tools?" he asked, pointing to a pile of wooden chairs with loose legs and missing screws. "Some," Jason admitted. His father had taught him basic repairs before the factory layoffs changed everything. For hours, he tightened bolts and replaced splintered wood, each fixed chair a small victory. Throughout the week, he felt the weight of suspicious gazes. Volunteers watched him warily, as if expecting him to reveal this was all an elaborate prank. The younger kids whispered and pointed when he passed, but he kept his head down and worked steadily, letting actions speak louder than words. Naomi Carter was especially skeptical at first. When she caught him struggling with a particularly stubborn chair leg on Thursday, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You're doing it wrong," she said flatly. "The bolt's stripped. You need a different size." Instead of bristling at her tone, Jason sat back on his heels. "Could you show me?" Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe. She disappeared and returned with a different wrench. "Like this," she demonstrated, her movements quick and sure. "My dad taught us basic repairs, said it was important to know how to fix things yourself." It was the first time she'd spoken to him without edge in her voice. The next day, when he arrived, she wordlessly handed him a bottle of water before heading to help with homework club. But while things slowly improved at the center, school became increasingly difficult. His old friends wouldn't let him eat lunch in peace. "Look at St. Jason," Tyler sneered on Friday, dropping into the seat across from him. Building up that college application? Or just trying to score points with the principal? You don't know what you're talking about, Jason muttered, keeping his eyes on his sandwich. Oh, we know exactly what this is. Another teammate chimed in. Damage control. Make nice with the charity cases so nobody remembers what you did. The words stung because they struck close to his initial motivation. But something had changed over the past week. The center had become more than just penance. It felt like purpose. The real trouble started when Coach Daniels cornered him after class that afternoon. Miller, the coach's voice boomed down the hallway. My office, now. Jason followed him into the small room plastered with football pennants and motivational posters. Coach Daniels settled behind his desk, his expression thunderous. Want to explain why my starting linebacker has missed 5 practices? He demanded. Tournament season starts in 3 weeks. This isn't the time for whatever this is. I've been volunteering at the community center, Jason said quietly. Volunteering? Coach's face reddened. You want to help people? Help your team? Help your school? This social justice kick you're on, it ends now. Miss another practice and you're benched for the season. Jason's heart hammered. Football was his ticket to college, his father's pride and joy, the cornerstone of his identity since freshman year. But he thought of the kids at the center, of Reverend Carter's quiet faith in him, of the small ways he was starting to make amends. Then bench me, he said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. I'm not quitting the center. He walked out before Coach could respond, leaving the older man sputtering behind his desk. That evening, Jason stayed late at the center, trying to lose himself in organizing donated books. He didn't hear the approaching footsteps until voices drifted through the open door. You really going to throw away your season for this? It was Tyler's voice, followed by several others from the team. Coach is serious about benching you. Jason turned to face them, spine straight. Look, I know you don't understand. Oh, we understand, Tyler cut in. You're sucking up to Carter and his preacher uncle, playing the hero. But we all know what really happened in the cafeteria. You showed everyone exactly who he was. Just some stuck-up new kid who thought he was better than everyone else. No. Jason's voice was quiet but firm. I showed everyone who I was. A bully. Someone so insecure he had to tear others down to feel big. He met Tyler's eyes. Malik Carter is twice the person I am. He tutors kids who can't afford help. He takes care of his sister. He deals with people like us with more dignity than we deserve. So yeah, I'm going to keep volunteering. And if that costs me my spot on the team, then maybe I didn't deserve it in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the soft sound of retreating footsteps, not from his teammates, but from behind him. Jason turned to see Malik standing in the shadows of the storage room, a stack of textbooks in his arms. Their eyes met for a long moment. Malik's expression was unreadable, but something had shifted in the air between them. Without a word, he nodded once, then continued down the hallway. The next day, when Jason arrived at the center, Malik didn't look away when their paths crossed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. That evening, as Jason wiped down tables after dinner service, Reverend Carter appeared beside him. Heard about your choice with the football team, he said quietly. Can't have been easy? Jason shrugged, focusing on a stubborn spot of dried sauce. Easier than I thought it would be. The Reverend smiled. Funny how that works, isn't it? Sometimes the right path becomes clearer the longer you walk it. The afternoon sun slanted through the youth center's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jason was organizing donated cans in the pantry when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Malik standing in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "We need to inventory these before the weekend," Malik said quietly. It was the first time he'd directly spoken to Jason in weeks. "Could use another set of eyes?" Jason nodded, grateful for the olive branch, however small. They worked in silence for several minutes, counting cans and noting numbers. The quiet wasn't exactly comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. 723 cans of green beans, Jason announced, finishing his stack. "That's what I got too." Malik made a note, then hesitated. "You're here every day now." "Yeah." Jason shifted his weight. "Feels right, you know?" Malik nodded slowly. "My mom used to volunteer here. Before what?" "Before Dad died. She barely leaves the house now, just works and sleeps." Malik's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jason caught the undercurrent of pain. "My mom's kind of the opposite," Jason found himself saying. "3 jobs, never home, been that way since I was 10. He hadn't meant to share that, but something about the dim pantry and Malik's quiet presence made it easier to speak truth. "Must get lonely," Malik said. "Yeah." Jason stacked another box of cans. "Guess that's why I acted like such a jerk, trying to fill something up." The confession hung in the air between them. Malik didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was thoughtful. "We've all got empty spaces." Their conversation was interrupted by Naomi bursting through the door. "There you are. I need help with the charity dinner plans, both of you." She spread a stack of papers across a nearby table, revealing lists and diagrams. "We've got 200 people coming Saturday. 200! And I need everything to be perfect." Jason watched in amazement as she took charge, delegating tasks with the authority of a seasoned event planner. Soon, he found himself helping create table arrangements, while Malik called local businesses for additional donations. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Jason discovered Naomi was a perfectionist who insisted on personally inspecting every detail. She had him rewash dishes that weren't spotless enough and refold napkins until they met her exacting standards. "You missed a spot," she'd say, pointing to water spots on glasses he'd just dried. "How can you even see that?" he'd grumble, but he'd do it again without real complaint. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Jason showed up early to help set up, surprised to find the parking lot already filled with motorcycles. Big Ronnie and his crew were unloading trucks full of supplies, everything from paper goods to fresh produce. "Morning, kid," Ronnie nodded to Jason. His weathered face crinkled into something resembling a smile. "Where do you want these boxes?" Inside, the center hummed with activity. Volunteers bustled about, transforming the humble space into something special. Naomi directed traffic like a tiny general, her braids bouncing as she moved from task to task. "Those tablecloths need to be straightened," she called to Jason, "and make sure the centerpieces are exactly centered." By evening, the center was packed with people from every corner of town. Teachers sat beside mechanics. Church ladies chatted with bikers. The mayor shared a table with the local grocery store owner. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, and conversation flowed as freely as the coffee. Naomi took the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "Before we eat, I want to thank everyone who helped make this happen." She went through her list of acknowledgments, then paused. A mischievous smile played at her lips. "And special thanks to Jason Miller, the boy who used to bully my brother but now helps me wash dishes." The room erupted in surprised laughter. Jason felt his face burn, but when he glanced at Malik, he saw him fighting back a smile too. Somehow, Naomi had managed to acknowledge the past while pointing towards something better. The evening stretched on, full of good food and better conversation. Jason found himself moving easily between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. He watched Malik doing the same, noticed how naturally he connected with people, how his quiet presence drew others in. At one point, Jason found himself in the kitchen with Big Ronnie, both of them up to their elbows in soap suds. "Never thought I'd see the day," Ronnie chuckled, passing him a dripping plate. "You're all right, kid. Making good choices now." "Trying to," Jason replied, carefully drying the dish. It was past midnight when Jason finally headed home. His feet ached, his back was sore, and his shirt was spotted with food stains. But his heart felt lighter than it had in years. In his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, still processing the evening. The way people from such different walks of life had come together. The way Naomi's joke had transformed his shame into something almost like redemption. The way Malik had caught his eye across the room and nodded just once, but with real acknowledgement. For the first time in his life, Jason felt the urge to pray. Not the formal prayers he'd learned in Sunday school, but something more raw and real. He knelt beside his bed, feeling awkward but sincere. "God," he whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if I'm doing this right, but thank you for second chances, for people who see better things in me than I saw in myself, for dishes that need washing and people who need help, and just thank you." He climbed into bed, exhausted but peaceful. The memory of laughter and fellowship followed him into sleep, a promise of better days ahead. The late September air carried the first hints of autumn as the town prepared for its 150th Founders' Day parade. Maple trees along Main Street had begun their annual transformation, dotting the sidewalks with early fallen leaves in shades of gold and crimson. Jason stood in front of the youth center, helping attach decorations to their parade float. The theme honored local veterans and hometown heroes, with photos of service members carefully mounted on both sides. In the center, larger than the rest, was a portrait of Malik's father in his military uniform, his smile warm and proud against the professional backdrop. "A little higher on the left," Naomi directed, supervising the banner placement with her usual precision. "No, your other left, Jason." He adjusted the corner, securing it firmly. The banner read, "Honoring our heroes, past and present," in bold red, white, and blue letters. Below it, smaller text listed the youth center's name and mission. Malik emerged from the center carrying more supplies. He paused beside Jason, studying their work. "Looks good," he said quietly. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Would you like to ride with us today?" Jason turned, surprised by the invitation. "Really? You sure?" Malik nodded. "There's room. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "you helped build it." The morning grew warmer as they finished the preparations. Reverend Carter arrived with coffee and donuts for the volunteers, and even Big Ronnie showed up with his crew, their motorcycles forming an impressive escort for the float. "Looking sharp, boys," Ronnie approved, his leather vest adorned with military patches that caught the sunlight. The parade route stretched through the heart of downtown, past shops and restaurants already filling with spectators. Jason felt strange excitement mixed with nervousness as they took their positions. He'd watched this parade every year of his life, but always from the sidelines. At exactly 10 o'clock, the high school marching band struck up their first number, and the parade began to move. Their float rolled forward slowly, following a group of vintage cars carrying elderly veterans. Jason stood near the back, while Malik and Naomi waved from the front. The crowd's response was enthusiastic. People cheered and clapped, many recognizing the cheap photos of local service members displayed. Children darted forward to catch candy tossed by volunteers walking alongside. The morning sun grew stronger, warming the pavement and bringing out the sweet smell of cotton candy from nearby vendors. They were about halfway through the route when it happened. The float was passing a particularly crowded section of sidewalk near the old courthouse. A man's voice, loud and harsh, cut through the festive atmosphere. "Get that boy off that float. This parade's for real heroes." The slur that followed hit like a physical blow. The crowd around the man fell silent, shocked. Malik's shoulders stiffened, but he kept waving, his face a mask of dignity. Without thinking, Jason jumped down from the float. His feet hit the pavement hard, and he strode toward the man, who was red-faced and belligerent in a worn baseball cap. "You're talking about my brother," Jason said, his voice clear and steady. He pointed to the photo of Malik's father. "That man died saving others. His son tutors kids who need help. He serves meals to anyone who's hungry. What have you done lately besides spread hate?" The man opened his mouth, then closed it, taken aback by the direct challenge. "You know what real heroes do?" Jason continued, his voice carrying across the now silent street. "They make the world better. They lift people up instead of tearing them down. That's what Malik does every single day. So yeah, he belongs on that float. He belongs anywhere he wants to be because he's 10 times the man you are." For a moment, everything was still. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread quickly, growing into a roar. Phones appeared, capturing the moment. The man slunk back into the crowd, disappearing between buildings. Jason felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Malik, who had climbed down after him. Their eyes met, and something profound passed between them. Understanding, respect, gratitude. "The float's leaving without us," Malik said with a small grin. They jogged to catch up, climbing back aboard to even louder cheers. The rest of the parade route passed in a blur of sunshine and smiling faces. Jason noticed his phone buzzing in his pocket. The moment was already spreading across social media, but he didn't care about that. What mattered was the quiet nod Malik had given him, worth more than any viral post. As the parade wound down, volunteers gathered to dismantle the float. The afternoon stretched into evening, the sky painting itself in soft oranges and purples. Most people had gone home, leaving Main Street littered with parade debris and memories. Jason was helping pack up the last of the decorations when Malik approached him. "Want to take a walk?" They found themselves sitting on the curb near the town square, watching as street sweepers began their cleanup. The first streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. "Thank you," Malik said simply, "for what you did today." "I meant it," Jason replied. Every word. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Malik spoke again. "You know what I remember most about my dad? He used to whistle while he worked on cars. Same tune every time. Some old song I never knew the name of." Jason smiled. "Mine used to sing in the shower. Terrible voice. Mom would bang on the door and tell him he was scaring the neighbors." They traded stories as the evening deepened. About fathers who worked hard and loved fiercer. About moments of pride and disappointment. About the weight of expectations and the freedom of forgiveness. Neither noticed the lone figure watching from across the street, half hidden in the growing darkness. Their laughter echoed off old brick buildings, drowning out the sound of footsteps retreating into shadow. As they finally stood to leave, Jason felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, not because anyone was watching, but because it was right. "See you Monday?" Malik asked. "Yeah," Jason nodded. "See you Monday, brother." They bumped fists and headed their separate ways, their long shadows stretching behind them in the glow of the streetlights. The day's events had changed something fundamental, not just between them, but in the fabric of their small town itself. The harsh ring of Jason's phone pierced the quiet night. He fumbled for it, squinting at the bright screen showing 2:33 in the morning. Reverend Carter's name flashed urgently. "Hello?" Jason's voice was thick with sleep. "Jason." The Reverend's usually steady voice trembled. "Someone's attacked the youth center. It's bad, son. Real bad." Jason sat bolt upright, fully awake now. "I'm coming." He threw on jeans and a t-shirt, his hands shaking as he tied his shoes. The drive to the center took only 7 minutes, but each second stretched like taffy. Red and blue police lights painted the pre-dawn darkness, casting eerie shadows on gathered faces. As Jason parked his truck, his stomach dropped. The youth center's windows gaped like broken teeth, glass glittering on the sidewalk. Ugly words sprawled across the pale walls in black spray paint, words that made his blood run cold. Hateful slurs, threats. His eyes caught particularly vicious phrases about Malik and felt sick. Reverend Carter stood talking to 2 police officers, his shoulders slumped but his head high. Malik and Naomi huddled nearby, their faces tight with anger and hurt. Other townspeople gathered in clusters, whispering and shaking their heads. "Who would do something like this?" someone murmured. Jason walked toward the Reverend, glass crunching under his feet. But before he could speak, a police officer emerged from inside, holding something familiar. Jason's Letterman jacket, the red and white fabric unmistakable in the flashing lights. "Found this by the back door," the officer announced, his voice carrying in the tense quiet. All eyes turned to Jason. He felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. "That's impossible," he said, his voice cracking. "I was home asleep, I swear." Malik's eyes met his, and Jason's heart sank at the hardness he saw there. All the trust they'd built, all the progress, it seemed to crumble in an instant. "The jacket was stolen from my locker last week," Jason added desperately. "I reported it missing." But doubt had already taken root. His former teammates, who'd come to see the commotion, huddled together near their trucks. "Guess he was faking it all along," one sneered loud enough to be heard. "Playing both sides?" "Typical," another spat. Reverend Carter raised his hands, his voice cutting through the growing murmurs. "Everyone needs to stay calm. We don't know what happened here, and pointing fingers won't help. The truth will come out in its own time." Jason's phone buzzed. His parents had arrived. His mother immediately wrapped an arm around his shoulders, her faith in him visible in every line of her face. But his father hung back, uncertainty clouding his features. "Son," his father said quietly, "you need to tell us the truth." "I am telling the truth," Jason's voice broke. "Dad, please, you have to believe me." His father's silence hurt worse than any accusation. The police took statements, photographed evidence, and eventually the crowd began to thin. But Jason couldn't leave. He found a broom in the storage closet and began sweeping up glass, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "You don't have to stay," Reverend Carter said softly. "Yes, I do." Jason's voice was rough with unshed tears. Hours passed. The police lights faded. His parents reluctantly left after he insisted on staying. One by one, everyone drifted away until only Jason remained, working steadily in the growing light of dawn. He swept and scrubbed, trying to erase the hatred someone had painted on these walls. His muscles ached, and dust mixed with the tears he couldn't hold back anymore. Each stroke of the broom felt like penance for a crime he hadn't committed. The sun rose slowly over the broken youth center, painting the shattered glass in shades of pink and gold. Jason's hands were raw from scrubbing, his clothes covered in dust and paint. But he kept working, even as his vision blurred with exhaustion and tears. The sound of footsteps made him look up. Big Ronnie stood in the doorway, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the damage. "Rough night," the biker said simply. Jason nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "You know," Ronnie continued, "Malik's daddy used to say something that stuck with me. He said the hardest thing about doing right isn't starting. It's keeping on when everybody thinks you're wrong." Fresh tears spilled down Jason's cheeks as he gripped the broom handle tighter. "I didn't do this," he whispered. "I wouldn't." "I know, kid." Ronnie's voice was gentle. "Truth's like cream. It always rises to the top. Just takes time." The biker picked up another broom and began sweeping without another word. Together they worked as the morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows through the broken windows of the place that had taught Jason what redemption really meant. The suspension notice lay heavy on the kitchen table. Principal Matthews' signature stood stark against the white paper, making it official. Jason was barred from school grounds until further notice. His mother had cried when they got the letter. His father had just walked away, shaking his head. The days stretched endlessly. Jason sat in his room, watching through his window as other kids walked to school, their backpacks bouncing, their laughter drifting up to his second-floor prison. Coach Daniels had already called. His spot on the team was gone. Just like that, everything he'd worked for vanished. "You made your bed," Coach had said gruffly. "Should have stuck to football instead of playing social worker." Even the neighbors had changed. Mrs. Peterson, who'd known Jason since he was 5, crossed the street when she saw him coming. Mr. Thompson stopped waving from his porch. Their silence hurt worse than any harsh words could have. Only his mother kept faith. Every day during her lunch break, she'd come home with a sandwich and a smile that didn't quite hide her worry. "This will pass, honey," she'd say, smoothing his hair like she did when he was little. The truth always comes out. But the truth felt buried under an avalanche of suspicion and disappointment. Jason spent hours replaying that night in his mind, trying to figure out who could have taken his jacket, who would want to hurt him this way. At the youth center, Malik struggled with his own doubts. He'd seen real change in Jason over the past weeks. Genuine effort, true remorse. The memory of Jason's face that morning, streaked with tears as he cleaned alone, didn't match with someone capable of such hate. "What if we're wrong?" Malik asked Naomi one afternoon, watching her sort through donated clothes. His sister paused, a thoughtful frown crossing her face. "Maybe we are," she said slowly. "And maybe we should find out." Naomi had always been the one to act while others hesitated. She started asking questions, listening to gossip, paying attention to the whispers that followed Jason's name. And then she heard something interesting. At the gas station where the bikers hung out, a kid was running his mouth. "My uncle showed that preppy white boy what happens when you try to play both sides," he'd bragged, not realizing who was within earshot. Naomi didn't waste time. She went straight to Reverend Carter, words tumbling out as she explained what she'd heard. The Reverend listened carefully, his expression growing grave. "Thank you, Naomi," he said when she finished. "I need to make a call." Big Ronnie answered on the first ring. The conversation was brief, but the biker's voice carried clear authority. "I'll handle this," he promised. The sun had set by the time the low rumble of a motorcycle echoed down Jason's street. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, when the distinctive sound made him sit up. Through his window, he saw Big Ronnie's familiar figure dismounting his bike. The doorbell rang, and Jason heard his mother answer. Footsteps on the stairs, then a knock at his door. "Come in," Jason called, his voice rough from disuse. Big Ronnie filled the doorframe, his leather vest creaking as he moved. His eyes, usually twinkling with hidden humor, were serious. "Got some news for you, kid," he said, settling into Jason's desk chair. "Seems one of my guys has a nephew with a big mouth and a small brain. Been bragging about teaching you a lesson." Jason's heart jumped. "What?" "Yeah." Ronnie's voice was grim. "Stole your jacket from the locker room, used it to frame you. Thought he was doing his uncle a favor, protecting Malik or some such nonsense." He shook his head. "Boy doesn't understand that real men face things head on, not sneaking around in the dark." Relief flooded through Jason so strongly it made him dizzy. Can you tell the police?" "Already done. The kid confessed as soon as I confronted him. Police will be calling your parents tomorrow to clear your name." Tears pricked at Jason's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me," Ronnie said gruffly. "Thank Naomi. Girl's got more sense than most grown folks I know." He stood, his expression softening. "You're a good kid, Jason. You made a mistake, but you owned it and worked to make it right. That's what matters." As Big Ronnie's motorcycle roared away into the night, Jason sat on his bed, overwhelmed by the sudden lifting of the weight he'd carried. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. Tomorrow, he could hold his head up again. For now, he just breathed, feeling truly free for the first time in days. The roar of Big Ronnie's motorcycle cut through the quiet evening air as he pulled into Jason's driveway. Jason stepped outside, watching as the big man dismounted, his weathered face unusually grave in the fading light. "Need to talk to you, son," Ronnie said, gesturing for Jason to join him by the bike. "Got something weighing heavy on my mind." Jason's heart thumped as he approached. Ronnie took a deep breath, his leather vest creaking as he crossed his arms. "It was my nephew," he said quietly. "Tommy. He's the one who vandalized the center. Stole your jacket to frame you." The words hit Jason like a physical blow. "Your nephew?" Ronnie nodded, shame evident in his expression. "Kept quiet about it to protect family. That was wrong of me, but now..." He paused, looking Jason straight in the eyes. "I can arrange for you to leave town quietly. Got friends up north who could help you start fresh while I handle this internally." Jason stood still, processing the offer. The easy way out stretched before him, a chance to escape the whispers, the pointed fingers, the doubt. But something inside him rebelled against the idea. "No," he said firmly. "Running means they win, and I'm done letting bullies win, even if they're wearing leather instead of Letterman jackets." A flash of respect lit up Ronnie's eyes. "Good answer, kid." Together, they rode to the youth center where Reverend Carter was working late. The Reverend listened calmly to their story, his hands folded on his desk. "God has a way of turning tragedy into triumph," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps this is our chance to show real change." That night, Jason sat at his computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to type. "This post isn't about what I didn't do. It's about what I did do. About the boy I was who poured juice over someone's head because I thought it made me look big. About every mean word, every cruel laugh, every time I chose wrong over right." The post spread quickly through social media. Comments flooded in, some skeptical, some angry, but many moved by his honesty. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets. Jason's words about transformation and redemption struck a chord that resonated far beyond their small town. News of Big Ronnie's nephew's confession spread through town like wildfire. By early morning, the youth center's parking lot filled with rumbling motorcycles, pickup trucks, and family cars. Veterans in their old service caps stood shoulder to shoulder with leather-clad bikers. Townspeople arrived carrying paint cans, brushes, and building supplies. "Never seen anything like this," Reverend Carter said softly, watching the crowd grow. His eyes glistened with tears of gratitude. Jason and Malik worked side by side on the largest wall, their brushes transforming ugly words into something beautiful. Where hate had marked the brick, they painted joined hands of different colors reaching toward each other. Angel wings spread across another section, their feathers detailed in gold and silver. Between them, they carefully lettered quotes about faith and unity. "Love your neighbor as yourself," Malik read aloud as he finished the last letter. His voice was quiet but clear. Small children darted around their legs, carrying pots of bright flowers to plant along the walkway, their laughter mixed with the sounds of hammering and friendly chatter. During a water break, Malik wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at Jason. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "Could have taken Ronnie's offer to leave." Jason dipped his brush in fresh paint before answering. "Maybe I needed to." He paused, adding, "Sometimes running away isn't the same as moving forward." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their work, Reverend Carter called everyone into a circle. They joined hands, rough ones and smooth ones, young and old, all colors side by side. The Reverend's prayer of thanks echoed in the quiet evening air. Among them stood Jason's father, his work clothes dusty from a day of repairs. He'd barely spoken, just steadily hammered nails and fixed what needed fixing. But his usual rigid posture had softened, and when his son caught his eye, he gave a small nod of approval. The autumn wind rustled through the trees as students filed into the high school auditorium. Excitement and nervous energy filled the air. This wasn't just another assembly. Posters about kindness and acceptance decorated the walls, and teachers guided the steady stream of teenagers to their seats. Principal Morris stepped up to the microphone, her voice echoing through the packed room. "Today's assembly is about more than just anti-bullying. It's about transformation, about how one moment can change everything." Malik Carter rose from his seat in the front row, straightening his collar as he walked toward the stage. The spotlight caught him, illuminating his calm presence. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. "7 months ago, I was sitting alone in our cafeteria reading a book," Malik began, his steady voice carrying through the hushed auditorium. "That morning, someone decided to pour orange juice over my head." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But this isn't a story about that moment. It's about what happened after." As Malik spoke about loss, forgiveness, and rebuilding, students leaned forward in their seats. Some nodded, recognizing their own struggles in his words. Others wiped away quiet tears. Then Malik turned, gesturing to the side of the stage. "Jason Miller, would you join me up here?" Jason's heart pounded as he walked up the steps. The same steps he'd bounded up countless times for pep rallies, but never like this. The spotlight felt different now. "This," Malik said, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder, "is the boy who poured juice on me that day." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But he's also the man who helped rebuild our town, who chose to stay when he could have run, who showed us all what real change looks like." The first person to stand was Naomi Carter, clapping with fierce pride. Then Big Ronnie and his bikers, who had slipped in at the back of the auditorium, rose to their feet. Like a wave, the entire audience followed, their applause thundering through the space. In the middle of the crowd, Jason's mother gripped her husband's hand tightly. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her son on stage. Her husband, usually so stoic, squeezed back, his eyes shining with pride and humility. After the assembly, Jason and Malik pushed through the double doors into the afternoon air. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the parking lot. "So," Jason kicked at a pebble, hands in his pockets. "Friends?" Malik's serious expression cracked into a wide grin. "Brothers," he corrected, and both boys burst out laughing. Their long shadows stretched across the pavement as the sun dipped below the hills. In the distance, the familiar rumble of motorcycles echoed, no longer a sound of intimidation, but one of family, loyalty, and grace renewed. From the doorway of the school, Reverend Carter watched the two young men, his voice carrying softly on the breeze. God doesn't waste pain, he transforms it. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.